The Striped Sweater is a spooky story about a group of boys who find some bloody clothes in the woods and stumble on an old, abandoned shack. In the woods, near the school playground, there is a path. Students from the school are banned from setting foot on it. If you follow the path, it leads to a clearing in the woods where there is an old, abandoned shack with a rusty lock on the door. The students would often tell stories about the old shack, claiming that it was haunted and that any kids or teenagers who went there would disappear, never to be seen or heard from again. One Saturday afternoon, in late October, a teenager named Ryan was hanging around with his younger brother Wayne and his best friends, Marcus and Brent. All four of the boys attended the school, and Ryan, Marcus and Brent were in the same class. They were playing football in the school playground when they saw two teenage couples going down the path. Wayne and Brent recognized them as older students from the school. The boys got the idea into their heads that they should go down that path and see just what the old shack was really all about. Wayne led the way, followed by Brent, Marcus, and Ryan. They had just gotten into the woods when they noticed a striped sweater lying there on the ground. When Ryan picked it up and turned it over, he saw dark stains on it that he thought looked like dried blood. The boys continued down the path, laughing and joking about it. Marcus was saying that maybe it belonged to Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees. He was just trying to scare the others. All of a sudden, a flock of birds shot out from the bushes. It was a murder of crows. An ominous sign. The boys continued down the path for a little longer until they came to a huge ditch. The shack was on the other side of the ditch. Ryan jumped across it first, then Marcus, then Brent, then Wayne. The shack was green, rusty, and really small. When walked up and looked through the dusty windows, they saw it had 2 rooms. There were a number of tools strewn across the floor. As they peered through the windows, they were confronted by 4 big black dogs. 2 Dobermans and 2 Rottweilers to be exact. Behind the snarling dogs, there was a man with a knife in his hand. He had long black hair, a red and black striped sweater, and a dirty face. He seemed to scraping something into a bucket and feeding it to the dogs. The man got up to sharpen his knife, and the boys got a better look at what he was working on. They were horrified when they recognized the bodies of the 4 teenagers they had seen going down the path before them. They were covered in blood, and their corpses had been hacked up into pieces. The terrified boys turned to flee, but they accidentally knocked over some paint cans that had been stacked outside. The cans fell over with a loud crash. The man with the knife turned around and spotted the boys. His face was twisted with rage, and he started shouting and unleashed his dogs. The teenage boys ran for their lives, the ravenous dogs hot on their heels. When they came to the ditch, Wayne, Marcus, and Brent managed to make the jump, but Ryan slipped. He landed with a thud at the bottom of the ditch, and one of the dogs pounced on him, sinking its teeth into his ankle. He managed to kick the dog in the face and free himself. While the dog was stunned, Ryan climbed out of the ditch. Bleeding from his leg, he ran down the path, yelling for his friends. The man with the knife and his 4 dogs were still chasing him. He could see the others waiting for him at the start of the path. He looked back over his shoulder and saw that the man and his 4 dogs had stopped. The man was standing there, staring at the boys with a menacing look on his face. When he reached his friends, Ryan collapsed from pain and exhaustion. The others picked him up and dragged him to the safety of the school grounds. While he was recovering, Ryan pulled down his pant legs to show them the bite marks. The boys called the police and told them to come down to the school. A few minutes later, 2 officers showed up in a squad car. They went down the path with flashlights and were gone for almost an hour. When they came back, one of the policemen was carrying the striped sweater in his hand. Both of them looked pale. "Okay," said one officer. "We found this striped sweater and a large amount of blood in that old shack. There was also some blood on the path leading up to the shack that was apparently hidden by the leaves. Aside from that, the sweater is all we have as evidence. We didn't find any man or any vicious dogs." Ryan lifted up his pants leg and showed them the bite marks. Then, the police took the boys down to the station for questioning. While Ryan was sitting in the office of the chief of police, he happened to notice an old, faded picture on the wall. "That's him," he cried. "That's the man with the knife." The chief of police looked puzzled. "That's impossible," he said. "The man in that photograph is Jack Monroe. He was a serial killer. Back in the early 80s, he murdered a number of young couples. I was the one who caught him. He was executed 30 years ago." Wall Mirrors is a creepy story about a girl who saw something that frightened her very much. Have you ever been afraid of mirrors? Write the answer in the comments. Rosalind Brinley was just like any other teenage girl. She loved looking at herself in the mirror. On her bedroom wall, there was a small oval mirror, and she spent hours gazing at her own reflection in it. Sometimes she would use the mirror to put on her makeup. At other times she would stand in front of it to brush her hair. Often she just used it to check herself out and convince herself she was still attractive. However, every night, before she went to bed, she would take the mirror down from the wall and place it face down on the ground. She couldn't quite explain it, but she hated to see reflections in the mirror in the dark. It creeped her out. Perhaps she was afraid of what she might find staring back at her from inside the mirror. One night, at the end of October, her parents went out, leaving her home alone. She sat on the couch, watching a couple of bad horror movies to pass the time. Around 2 a.m., she started nodding off, so she decided to go upstairs and stumble into bed. She walked to her bedroom, half asleep, and as soon as she plopped down on her bed, she was out cold. She didn't realize that she had forgotten to take her mirror off the wall. It was facing her. Later that night, Rosalind was awoken by the rumble of a thunderstorm. She rubbed her eyes and sat up in bed. It was very dark and she could barely see anything in her room. Glancing to her left, she noticed that her mirror was still on the wall. All of a sudden, there was a flash of lightning and it lit up her room. Staring into her mirror, Rosalind saw something that frightened her. There were 3 little kids staring at her. Their skin was ghostly pale and their eyes were completely black. She covered her mouth, trying not to scream. She prayed that it had just been a terrible nightmare or her imagination conjuring up shapes in the darkness. There was another flash of lightning. This time, there was nothing in the mirror, just her own reflection. Sighing with relief, she closed her eyes and lay back on her pillow. Rosalind slept until noon, and when she woke up, the storm was still going on outside. She had an unbearable pain in her left thigh. When she rolled up her pants leg to see what was hurting her, she found a gash in her thigh that was 2 inches long and 1 inch deep. It was fresh and still bleeding. She had no idea what had caused this to happen. Wincing in pain, she stumbled out of bed and tried to stand up. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw something on her mirror. There was a message scrawled in blood. It read, "We missed watching you sleep at night." Rosalind screamed and fell back onto her bed. A child's voice boomed in her mind, "Don't scream, it hurts our ears." She covered her mouth and looked around her room. There was nobody around. She picked up her phone and called her best friend, Dahlia. "Hello," said Dahlia. "Thank God you answered," said Rosalind. "Something happened, Dahlia. I can't explain right now, but I'm scared. Can I please come over to your house? My parents aren't home yet, even though they told me they would be back by now. Please." "Of course," replied Dahlia. "Thanks. I'll be over in 5. When Rosalind hung up, she looked at the mirror again. The message was gone. It was as if the words had been wiped off. It looked pristine, like nothing had ever been written there. She ran downstairs and out the front door, not stopping until she reached Dahlia's house. Rosalind pounded on her friend's door. As soon as Dahlia opened it, Rosalind raced inside, shaking with fear. She showed Dahlia the open wound on her leg and told her everything that had happened. Dahlia was speechless. I don't know what to say," she stammered. You're sleeping over here tonight, right? Rosalind nodded. The two girls spent the rest of the day watching movies and playing games on the Wii. That night, they both fell asleep on Dahlia's bed around midnight. Hours later, Rosalind woke up, her leg burning and her mouth thirsty. She got out of bed and headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. In the hallway, there was a big mirror that hung on the wall, over a coffee table. She tried not to look at it, but something drew her closer to it. What she saw disturbed her. In the mirror, there were 12 children. They had pale skin and black eyes, just like the others. She ran into the kitchen and tried to get the horrible image out of her mind. Just then, she noticed an old mirror on the wall, above the sink. Unable to resist, she looked into it. Reflected in the mirror, she saw her own parents. Their skin was pale white and their eyes were pitch black. They looked as though they were dead. "Mama? Daddy," she choked. She slowly backed away, tears running down her cheeks. She slipped on a puddle of water and fell backwards, hitting her head on a table. She passed out. Upstairs, Dahlia suddenly woke up and looked around. When she saw that Rosalind was missing, she went to look for her. When she approached the kitchen door, Dahlia was horrified to see her friend's bloody hand lying motionless on the ground. She pushed the door open and screamed. Rosalind's mangled body lay sprawled on the kitchen floor. She was naked and covered from head to toe in bloody scratches. On her chest, scratched into her flesh, were the words, "She belongs to us now." Dahlia recoiled in terror. She looked up at the mirror over the sink and saw something that sent her fleeing from the kitchen. Written in blood were the words, "You're next." Dahlia grabbed the phone and called the police. Soon 2 homicide detectives arrived at her house. The writing on the mirror had disappeared. They found Rosalind's mangled body lying on the floor. Dahlia was slumped in a corner, her arms clutching her knees and muttering to herself. "What happened here?" asked one of the detectives. "The mirrors," mumbled Dahlia. "What about the mirrors?" he asked. "They live in the mirrors," Dahlia replied. "Who lives in the mirrors?" he asked. "Them," she screamed. "At night, they watch us sleep." The police thought Dahlia was insane. When they searched Rosalind's house, they found the mangled bodies of her parents. Pondering the horrible scene, the police tried to figure out exactly what had gone on. The theory they came up with was that Rosalind had probably gone insane. She must have murdered her own parents, they said, then she took her own life. The police quickly closed the case, labeling it a murder-suicide. They took the corpses of Rosalind and her parents to the morgue for an autopsy. They handcuffed Dahlia and told her they were bringing her down to the station for questioning. As they were leaving, Dahlia looked up at the mirror once more. In the mirror, she saw Rosalind, pale-faced and with blackened eyes, staring back at her. "I'm next," she mumbled as the police led her away. Friendship Bracelets is a spooky story about a new girl at school who becomes obsessed with her friend. It was the 3rd month into the school year at Burton High. Everyone was pretty familiar with one another. One day, a new student arrived. Her name was Allison Summers, and she was an odd one. She had long black hair, pale skin, and deep, dark circles under her eyes. Not too many students paid much attention to her. At lunch, everyone would go about their business, not bothering to offer Allison a spot at their lunch table. This went on until Julie Taylor, a kind-hearted girl, noticed that Allison was sitting alone. "Do you mind if I sit with you?" she asked. Allison replied with no. Julie sat across from Allison. Julie's friend Kate walked by. "Kate, come sit with us." Kate walked over and sat with them both. They talked almost all of lunch, only stopping to eat some of their food. Allison enjoyed Julie's company. However, she wasn't too sure Kate that would make a good friend for her. Over the course of the next few weeks, Allison began to like Julie more and more, but the more she liked Julie, the less she liked Kate. One day, during Christmas break, Julie invited Kate and Allison to have a sleepover at her house while her parents were away. Allison, Julie, and Kate were watching a scary movie in the living room. Julie took out a small bag and said, "I have a little surprise for you." She pulled out 3 friendship bracelets. They all put them on their wrists. "Now the 3 of us can be BFFs," said Julie. "Best friends forever." Allison stared at Kate, her face twisted with jealousy. She hated her more than ever. Kate grew uncomfortable and excused herself to go use the restroom. She went upstairs and tiptoed into Julie's room instead. There, she dug through Allison's bag and came across some very weird stuff. She found Allison's journal and read a few of the pages. They were filled with demented scrawls and things like "Julie and I will be friends forever" or "Kate doesn't deserve to be Julie's friend. I should kill her." Kate freaked out and put Allison's journal back in her bag. Downstairs, in the living room, the other girls were growing restless. "I'm going to go see what's taking Kate so long," Julie told Allison. She went upstairs and knocked on the bathroom door. There was no answer. She opened it and Kate wasn't inside. She went to her bedroom and found Kate sitting on her bed staring at the floor. "What's wrong?" Julie asked. She had never seen Kate so scared and nervous before. I looked in Allison's bag and you looked through someone else's stuff?" "Kate, you can't do that." "I know, but I was curious. I found her journal. She said she was going to kill me. Can you believe it?" Julie was dumbfounded. "Maybe you read a word wrong or something." "No, I didn't. You know I'm one of the top readers at the school. I know something's up." Julie and Kate returned downstairs. Allison was still watching the movie. What they didn't know was Allison had been listening to their whole conversation. All of a sudden the power cut out. Kate started freaking out. "Calm down," said Julie. "Maybe a circuit blew or something. The power will come back on in a moment." After a few moments it didn't. "I'm gonna go get some candles from the basement. You two stay up here," said Julie as she went downstairs. Kate kept her distance from Allison. What Kate didn't know was Allison was holding a knife under her blanket, which would end Kate's life. "I have to go use the restroom," Allison said, getting up. She clutched the knife behind her back. The voices in her head started telling her to do it. She walked up a few steps and then ran back down and lunged at Kate with the knife. Kate moved, the knife pierced her arm, pinning her to the ground. She screamed out in pain. Julie couldn't hear. "She's mine," Allison said as she pulled the knife out of Kate's arm. She then stabbed Kate in the stomach. "You should have stayed away from me. You got in the way of mine and Julie's friendship. Now you must pay." She slit Kate's throat. Kate immediately stopped breathing, she lay on the ground still. Julie ran back upstairs with the candles. As she walked into the living room, the smell of blood filled her nose. The lights cut back on, and to her horror there was Kate in a pool of her own blood. Allison was standing by Kate's body, clutching the knife tightly. She had a crazed look on her face. She was in the way of her friendship, she cried. "I had to get rid of her." "What have you done?" Julie screamed. "Kate, my best friend." "Why? You're a psycho." Julie tried to run upstairs, but Allison got her before she could. The next day, Julie's parents discovered her mangled body in her bedroom. Next to her were 3 friendship bracelets. They had been torn to pieces. There was also a small folded sheet of paper. It read, "She was my best friend and mine only. Too bad our friendship was torn apart." Red Hoodie is a creepy tale about friends. Once there was a young girl named Ada. She was quiet and shy, but a lot fun to hang out with. She had a close friend called Tyranny who she spent a lot of time with. The 2 girls were very close and they sometimes referred to each other as sisters. Tyranny always wore a very distinctive blue hoodie wherever she went. It was very rare to see Tyranny dressed in anything else. One evening, Ada and Tyranny were playing together at the park. After a while, it got dark outside, so the two went home. Tyranny's grandparents called over to visit and told her that there was a funeral the next day she had to attend. Tyranny turned to Ada with a frown but tried her best to disguise it into a rather awkward grin. Ada knew she was upset, but she respected her friend's feelings and didn't ask. "Hey Ada, I'm sorry, but my grandparents are taking me to my cousin's funeral," she said. "Sorry, I can't stay." Ada just smiled politely. "It's okay, Tyranny," she replied. "Maybe next time when you're in a better mood." The girls heard the car horn honking outside, so Tyranny got her stuff and headed out to where her grandparents were waiting. She waved goodbye to Ada, then got into the car and they drove off. Ada ate dinner, then went upstairs to bed. As she was trying to fall asleep, she thought she heard a strange noise outside her bedroom door. She turned over and opened her eyes. The bedroom door slowly creaked open and there, standing in the doorway, was a shadowy silhouette. It looked like the figure of a girl. "Is that you, Tyranny?" asked Ada groggily. "You came back." Ada welcomed her friend and told her she could sleep beside her on the floor in a sleeping bag. The next morning, Ada woke up and turned over in bed. She saw the empty sleeping bag on the floor, but there was no sign of Tyranny. She got dressed and headed down for breakfast. When she walked into the kitchen, she was surprised to find that her friend wasn't there either. Ada shrugged her shoulders. "Maybe she went to the park to play without me," she thought. After breakfast, Ada hurried down to the park to meet up with her friend. Ada saw Tyranny over by the playground, but something was different about her. She was wearing a red hoodie and she didn't speak at all, not even when Ada greeted her. She didn't even say, "Hi." Ada shrugged it off again, but this time she felt a little uneasy. That evening, when it was getting dark again, Ada decided to go home. She turned around to invite her friend over, but Tyranny was nowhere to be found. Ada scratched her head and shrugged for a third time that day. She figured her friend knew her way around the neighborhood, so she went home alone for dinner. While Ada was eating her steaming hot dinner of lasagna on her plate, she looked at her mom and dad. "Mom, Tyranny and I were at the park and had a bit of fun, but something was strange about her today. She was wearing a red hoodie. She never usually does." Ada's father looked at his wife and shrugged. Honey, you were at the park by yourself," said her mother. "There's no way she could have been with you." Ada looked at her mother. "Mom, what do you mean?" "She was with me. I saw her." Ada insisted. Ada's mother shook her head. "No dear. Tyranny left to go to her cousin's funeral yesterday. If she was going to come back here to visit you, her grandparents would have called us, Ada. You know that." Ada felt a chill go down her spine. In a shaking voice, she said, "Mom, if that's true, then who was I with at the park?"